We will move on now to session 3, which is going to cover productivity and capacity. And I'm really pleased to introduce, first up, Ben, Clare and Katie Franklin from the ABC, who are going to talk about their experience as an employer and employee working for the ABC. So Ben and Katie, I'd like to hand over to you.
Yeah, who would like to start?
You go for it, Ben.
Yeah, okay, cheers. Hi everyone. So this is Ben speaking. Fantastic to be here this afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to be part of this. So I guess it's good really to start off with a really brief history of how I got to where I am, because it does play, I think, a part in how I guess things have worked out, and also what how employers over the years have really been really open to the idea of employing people with vision impairment, despite various difficulties that are often perceived. So I was after leaving school, I went to TAFE and did web designing, which was actually something that I thought was going to be my career. Because in the early 2000s, that was the buzzword. Everyone was making websites, and as it turned out, there was no real work in it. It was very difficult to get hired in that capacity, and I think a lot of that was to do with the fact that screen reading technology, while it was good for doing stuff like word processing and things like that, at that time it wasn't overly good for programming. Especially in evolving programming styles, which was common with websites. It was all right with all the established ones, but anything new and dynamic, that was where we sort of got lost at that point. So I ended up, without really thinking about it, it was just an opportunity that came along. I ended up in journalism, and I worked at the Daily Telegraph newspaper for several years in Sydney. I was actually one of the very last cadets that they ever had. So nowadays, if you do journalism, you go to university and you get qualified that way, whereas I was trained at the paper. So I started off with very basic training, monitoring police radios, picking up photocopying and getting the journalists' lunch from Red Rooster and McDonald's and stuff like that. Moving on into I ended up working in the police reporting section, which was quite exciting. And I think what that taught me then, one of the main things I learned out of that was that it was possible and is possible for people who are blind, and I'm totally blind, to work in a standard office where there was no one else who was blind. My disability hardly got mentioned. I was just one of the team there. I had a job to do. I had the same demands as everybody else. As was mentioned earlier, the work access program was around even then. So way back in 2001, it was around, and they did fund my the JAWS program on my computer, which you had to have basically back then, or a similar screen reader. One thing my employer did say at the time was they were surprised and quite delighted as to how little had to be changed in order for me to work there. They were expecting a whole lot more they had to do. They were worried they had to put voice activation in the elevator. And I said, well, instead of spending $50,000 on that, you can spend 10 cents and put braille labels on the buttons. And they were really excited about that. They thought, oh, goodness, that's great. So things like that were really sort of led the way. And then that actual newspaper ended up employing a lot of other people with various disabilities. We even had people who were quadriplegic and were operating computers using, their mouths and whatever else. And, all sorts of innovative things were happening. And that sort of led the way in that area. Since then, I've worked overseas for several years in the Pacific. That was the workplace environment there was definitely not what you would call accessible. But again, it was this open-mindedness people who basically, you know, and I guess confidence for me as well. And I think that does play a role. If you can work confidently and feel comfortable working in unfamiliar environments, it certainly helps to lessen fears of employers. So now at this time, I'm working sort of 3 different jobs in various different areas, some of them to do directly with disability and some of them not. So I'm still working in the foreign aid sector. So I do a lot of work with disability organisations across the Pacific, and I was lucky enough to go back to Fiji recently. And of course, another of my jobs is with the ABC, which I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of. And I have to thank Katie because I have these other jobs, she's been extremely good about fitting me into various different things where time is allowed. So they've been so flexible. I think most of us know of or know personally Naz Campanella, who really was and still is, I guess, a trailblazer when it comes to working in the ABC and in media. And you've probably noticed as well now that the ABC is doing a lot of coverage of disability issues, and I think that's fabulous. And one really great thing too is that we're really trying to normalise it. So when we explore issues related to disability, that it's something that is actually a story. It's not just a story because of someone with disability. There's actually a focus, a reason why we're telling that story. And I think that's one area where the ABC really leads, you know, the way in that. So that's sort of our external facing work that we do. We try hard to make our platforms accessible, obviously, things like iView and the apps and whatever else. But also internally, we have a group called ABC Inclusive that really works hard on issues related to accessibility within the ABC, so for people who are working there. And I've had nothing but support ever since I started there. Working from home, while it has its definite fantastic opportunities and whatever, it also has its challenges because you're not in the office, you're not meeting people, and sometimes your equipment is not necessarily up to the standard that it needs to be to work in the office environment because you're often using your own computers and equipment. So, you know, I've been really, really lucky, and I'm really grateful that you know, Katie and the team where I've been working have been really supportive in getting me into various different areas, trying things, seeing what works and what doesn't work, we try something else. So at the moment I'm working as part of the engagement team. So we really engage the community in various events that the ABC does, like forums and storytelling, and really just getting people's opinions out there, you know, and engaging with the community. And with the election, of course, coming up, that's become more important than ever. And I'm really enjoying working with that. And some of you may have seen in BCA Update, I put in an advertisement. So if anyone wants to engage with me on that, that would be fantastic. But I'll hand over to Katie for her perspective. But yeah, after that, if anyone has any questions, feel free ask. I sort of did skim over this a little bit, but I really just wanted to give the idea that, you know, it is very, very possible for people who are blind to work in standard office environments, not necessarily disability related, although it's fine if it is, and that it's very easy to work with people who are blind to make sure that whatever adjustments need to be made are there, and it's not a big deal. You know, it really isn't. So I'll hand over to Katie, and yeah, as I said, after that, if anyone has any questions. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Ben. So I think Ben has covered quite a lot of our experience there. I think the main thing for me to add, it kind of expands on what Ben was talking about, was that, you know, it was when Ben joined my team in a paid internship initially, it was really obvious the experience and the talent that Ben would be able to bring to the team. So then what really came down to was finding the role within my team that suited Ben best, because it was very clear that he was good in research. It was very clear that he's great with people and talking to people and getting information from people, which is obviously, very important in terms of the community engagement work that we're doing and trying to, talk to people in all walks of life around, the issues that matter to them. And that's particularly obviously poignant at the moment in terms of an election. And that's the kind of work that Ben's doing now. So it was really just what's the role that will, best utilize Ben's talents within my team, but also work for Ben, given he has, his other work commitments as well. So we tried a few things. We tried one role, and we tried a few different things to see if that would be the right fit. And we both reached the conclusion after experimenting a little bit that wasn't quite right. But then we really found this community engagement space, which Ben has excelled at. He recently organised, or was instrumental in helping to organise, a community engagement event that we held out of the Northern Territory, which was no small feat given the remoteness of some of the communities there, trying to find people to participate in that forum. So his skills and expertise really came to the fore there. So it's, like I said, it's just it was about experimenting and both of us, I guess, being flexible as well. But I think Ben would agree that we found the role for him to really shine. And yeah, that's, I think, the main input from me, as Ben said as well. Ben's input is tremendous to the team generally about what we're doing. Like we'll be having a discussion about, doesn't necessarily, it's not something necessarily Ben might be working on a particular time, but his input into the general discussion about whatever news we might be talking about or whatever stories we might be thinking about doing is invaluable. So everything's been super positive from my perspective, and it's been a fantastic experience.
Ben and Katie, thank you so much for coming along today and for sharing your success and your story with us. Does anyone have any questions for Ben or for Katie before we move on to Jane? No? All right, I'd like to introduce now Jane Britt. Jane is one of the BCA Policy and Advocacy staff. She's the team leader for Policy and Advocacy team here at BCA. And over to you, Jane, to share some of your experiences with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And I'd like to say thank you to everyone who is attending this today. I'd also like to reiterate from earlier that acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently based, which is the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people in Brisbane. I have been on quite a strict trajectory with my employment journey, coming from a graduate program into employment with BCA, into their policy and advocacy team for the last few years, recently moving up into the role of policy and advocacy team leader from about August last year. What I have learned throughout this time is that for a person of like myself, I am deafblind, that the adjustments in the workplace can be made to be able to achieve anything. For me, I've forged a trajectory into management that has been made possible by what Nicole was speaking about earlier, which is the job access program. So I do have assistive technology that helps me to be able to do my day-to-day job. I use a screen reader called Zoom Text, which enlarges things on the screen, and it can also be turned on for voice navigation to be able to hear the content that's on the screen. But I've also had quite a lot of people that have shown faith in me And I have stepped up into leadership through an executive leadership program that BCA held last year. And I've also been fortunate enough to have opportunities externally, particularly through the Disability Leadership Institute, to be able to gain some expertise and knowledge in leadership, and especially how that looks in spaces of disability work. I would say to any of the employers sitting in the room today that the sky's the limit. For someone with disabilities, there's certainly a lot of myths around employment of people with disabilities, around, cost, as was referred to before, around productivity, which, certainly I'm testament to it, and so are many of my other colleagues that are sitting in the room today, as well as many people that have gone before me that have disabilities and have really forged an incredible legacy and pathway into all levels of employment across all different sectors. My two particular mentors that I look up to and respect a great deal, both have worked at the top levels of their particular organisations, overseeing staffs of many hundred people, and they've done that quite successfully. Even though they have had disabilities, there has been no issues with productivity and certainly no issues around cost. So I'd say if you see someone coming towards you in a job interview with a cane, or you see someone using Braille, it's not something to be afraid of. You can certainly make the accommodations to make it, someone able to be quite successful in a workplace, and especially at all levels of management. I would encourage to look upwards. There are so many people that are out there that have extraordinary abilities and talents that cannot be offered to you in leadership levels. So I would like to conclude today by, thanking you for your participation in this today, for hearing what we have to say, and also for thinking, about how you can best make your workplaces work for people with disabilities.
Thank you very much, Jane.